Today we're coming back around as Oathbreaker with the Lord of the Rings decks, and we're going to use the Hobbits deck. Sort of. And by sort of, I mean there is no Abzan planeswalkers in the entire history of Magic since they started printing planeswalkers. Magic, please get on that. So instead, we're going to have to go with a 2-color variation in this deck, and we're going to use Ajani the Greathearted as a green-white Oathbreaker for this deck. A green, and a white. You get a 5 starting loyalty Ajani Planeswalker with creatures you control have Vigilance. +1, you gain 3 life. -2, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each other planeswalker you control. That last part's not going to matter so much because we don't have any other planeswalkers in the deck, but the +1/+1 counters allow us to make our little hobbits a lot bigger. Gaining 3 life kind of goes in hand with all of the food tokens and life gain triggering stuff that we have going on in the deck. So I thought Ajani fit really well with what we were trying to do here. As for the signature spell, we're going to go back into the Lord of the Rings spells again. We're going to use Pippin's Bravery for the main set. For a green, you get an instant that says you may sacrifice a food. If you do, target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. Otherwise, that creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So what this does for us is it gives us a threat to cast out of the command zone in order to make one of our little hobbits more dangerous. So if they're like, well, I'll just let that little guy through, well, that guy might not be so little when he makes contact with their face. Speaking of the little guys, here's our first set of hobbits, starting with the Gaffer. For 2 and a white, you get a Halfling Peasant, 2/3. At the beginning of each end step, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, draw a card. This guy goes pretty well hand in hand with the food tokens, or if you plus Ajani, it's going to give you a card every turn. Next up is Sam Loyal Attendant. For 1, a green, and a white. This is half of the commander that came with the Precon. 2/4 partners with Frodo Adventurous Hobbit. Unfortunately, we don't have the black, so that part doesn't really matter. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a food token. Activated abilities of food you control cost 1 less to activate. Since this is kind of a food-centric deck, this is a good one to have in there to make them cheaper to activate and gives you a free food every turn. Next up is a good reason to have all that food laying around. It's Feasting Hobbit. For 1 and a green, you get a 2/2 Halfling Citizen with Devour Food 3. As it enters, you sacrifice any number of foods, and it gets that many +1/+1 counters on it. Creatures with power less than it cannot block it. Well, if you have a pile of food laying around, you can stack several of those and make this an unblockable just face smasher. Next up is Motivated Pony. For 4 and a green, you get a 3/3 Trampling Haste Horse that says whenever a motivated pony attacks, attacking creatures get +1/+1 until end of turn. If a food entered the battlefield under your control this turn, untap those creatures and they get an additional +2/+2 until end of turn. So this kind of gives us a way to have like a mini overrun effect based off of like if we had a food token come into play, and then you just go ahead and keep on slamming through. A good mana fix here that also works well with our life gain is Prize Pig. For 1 and a green, you get a 0/3 Boar that says whenever you gain life, put that many ribbon counters on the Prize Pig. If there are 3 or more on it, remove those counters and untap it. We're gaining a bunch of life with this deck, so this thing can pump out a ton of mana for us. Again, another food-centric card, it's Banquet Guest. For X, a green and a white, you get a 0/0 Halfling Citizen with Affinity for Food, which means for every food token you control, it costs 1 less to cast. It has Trample, so that way you can kind of punch the big thing through. And then on top of that, it has enters the battlefield with twice X +1/+1 counters. So basically every food actually gives it 2 counters. And then you can pay 2 and sack a food to gain Indestructible. So this thing has a lot going for it with food tokens. We also have probably one of the best food token creating cards in the entire deck. We have Farmer Cotton. For X, a green and a white. It's a 1/1 Halfling Peasant that when it enters the battlefield, create X white Halfling creature tokens and X food tokens. So this thing's going to basically just bump up our creature count and go wide, and it's also going to give us food tokens to do all the other food interactions we've already been talking about. So like a fun interaction would be, Farmer Cotton makes a bunch of halflings, and then when you attack with the motivated pony, they're going to get an additional +2/+2 along with the +1/+1 if you just drop it in and go. Our second batch of hobbits, we're going to use another partner pair that's been broken apart since we don't have black in the deck. It's Mary Warden of Isengard. For 1, a green and a white, you get a 1/4 Halfling Advisor. And it says, whenever 1 or more artifacts enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 white soldier token with lifelink. This ability triggers only once each turn. So as you're creating your food tokens, you're going to go ahead and get soldier tokens. So the best thing you can do here is if you have some kind of instant speed way of making food on another player's turn, you can get a little more mileage out of this rather than just making it on your turn. And then you can go ahead and make another one on somebody else's turn. With all this food that we have going on and all this other life gain, especially with like Ajani's ability, we have Treebeard Gracious Host for 2, a green and a white. You get a 0/5 Tree Folk with Trample and Ward 2 that when it enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens. And whenever you gain life, put that many +1/+1 counters on target Halfling or Tree Folk. So you can either bulk Treebeard himself up pretty big or another Tree Folk you might have in the deck if you want that. Or you just start making the little hobbits bigger as you gain life. So every time you +1 Ajani, that's 3 counters going on to something. So it works out pretty well for us. Same with the food. You pop a food, you go ahead and get 3 counters on something else. We're also including Birds of Paradise here because it comes from the Precon itself. Tap, add a mana of any color, 0/1 for a green. We have the food variation of this, the Gilded Goose for a green. It says 0/2, pay 1 and a green to create a food token, or tap and sack a food in order to make a mana of any color. So this is one of those things where it's like, okay, if you have Mary on the board, you can go ahead and make a food with something else, and then on somebody else's turn, you can tap the Gilded Goose to make another food token and also get the 1/1 soldier token. Another one of our +1/+1 counter slingers with all these tokens we're going to be creating is Rosie Cotton of Southland. For 2 and a white, you get a 1/1 halfling peasant that says when she enters the battlefield, create a food token, and whenever you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control that is not Rosie. So you can go ahead and create a bunch of food tokens, or you can create the soldier tokens, or whatever you're creating off of your other stuff. Rosie Cotton of Southland is going to start pumping counters on all kinds of stuff and making your wide board tall as well. We also have Shire Sheriff from the main set. For 1 and a white, you get a 2/2 halfling soldier with vigilance that says when it enters the battlefield, you can sack a token. When you do, exile a creature your opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So now this is your bread and butter exile creature thing, but you got to sack a token to get it. Well, we're going to have plenty of food tokens, plenty of other like soldier tokens and that kind of stuff that are lying around that we can sacrifice and go ahead and put something of theirs that's much bigger than what we're getting rid of underneath of it. They also have the reprint of Prosperous Innkeeper. For 1 and a green, you get a 1/1 that enters the battlefield. You create a treasure token, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. So we got more life gain synergies to work with our life gain triggering counter stuff. We get more treasure tokens. We just got a bunch of things going on with this part of the deck. Our last panel is the last little bit of stuff that goes in the deck. Most of it is halflings, but there is a couple other ones that are not. First up is Tireless Provisioner. For 2 and a green, you get a 3/2 Elf Scout with Landfall that says whenever a land enters the battlefield, create a food or a treasure token. So we have options here. Most of the time, you're probably going to want the food token to sacrifice to the food functions of the deck, but once in a while, you might need some color fixing, or maybe you just need that extra mana to pump something else out. So you get some options off the Provisioner. We also have Samwise Gamgee from the main set. Green-white, 2/2 halfling peasant. When a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a food. So as we're casting our halflings and stuff out of the deck, we're going to get food tokens. And then you can sacrifice 3 foods, return a target historic card from your graveyard to your hand, and that's artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. So if one of your legendaries gets blown up, if an artifact gets blown up that you really want to have back, or a saga, if you have sagas in your deck get blown up or die at the end of their 3 chapters, you go ahead and get them back by just sacking 3 foods with Samwise laying around. We also have another variation of Samwise in the deck, Samwise the Stout-Hearted. For 1 and a white, you get a 2/1 halfling peasant with Flash that says when it enters the battlefield, choose up to 1 target permanent in your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn, return it to your hand, the ring tempts you. So, like, if they blow up one of your key pieces, you can Flash Samwise the Stout-Hearted and just put it right back in your hand, and you get a ring temp trigger out of it as well. The last couple of hobbits that we're going to put in the deck is almost like you wish they were a partner pair. It is the mono green versions of Merry and Pippin. First up is Mariotic Brandybuck. For 1 and a green, 2/2 halfling citizen. Whenever one or more halflings you control attack a player, create a food token. So if you're in a 4-player game and you attack 3 opponents, you're going to get 3 food tokens, no matter how many creatures you swing with. But it's a good way to get a burst of food. We also have Peregrine Took. 2 and a green, 2/3 halfling citizen. If 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional food are created instead. So every time you make a food, you get 2 food. If you trigger something to create a soldier token or a halfling token, you get a food. This just kind of builds up your food count. Now we're going to move on to the instants and sorceries that I picked for the deck out of the Precon, and a couple of cards that aren't in the Precon, but I felt fit the themes of the deck and what the Hobbits are doing anyways. First up, we have the Battle of Bywater. For 1 white, you get a sorcery that says destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, then create a food for each creature you control. For the most part, your creatures are only going to be little guys unless you've been just pumping tokens across the board. So this is usually going to be kind of a semi one-sided wipe, and you're going to get a bunch of food tokens for your little stuff. We also have Cultivate, 2 and a green. Sorcery, search your library for 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards, put 1 on the battlefield, the other 1 tapped. You know, your basic land fetch. We also have Revive the Shire from the main set. 1 and a green sorcery, return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand, create a food token. It's here mostly as a food creator, but it also helps us get back things that have been blown up. We also have Fumigate from the Precon. We got 3 white. Sorcery, destroy all creatures. You gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. Because sometimes you just have to reset the board and get things back to normal before you can build back up again and defeat your opponents. And then one of the cards I added into the deck that it's not from here, it's actually from one of the Innistrad sets. It's Second Harvest for 2 green instant. For each token you control, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that permanent. So for all of our soldiers, all of our halflings, all of our food, this thing will give us a doubling effect that actually has a name that matches what's going on with the hobbits, harvesting their crops. And I just thought it fit well here. Our second series of instants and sorceries. First off, we have Slip on the Ring. It's a good way to protect our stuff. For 1 and a white instant, exile a target creature you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control. The ring tempts you. So, like, if they target your stuff with a single target removal spell, you can blink it out of the game and get it, to go away and come back again. Or if you have something with an ETB, you can recycle it to do another ETB by blinking it out and putting it back in. We also have Hobbit Sting as one of our removal spells. 1 and a white instant, it deals X damage to target creature, where X is the number of creatures you control plus the number of foods you control. So this can get really high really quick, especially if you're just pumping out food tokens and you have a bunch of little guys laying around, where you can just tear down pretty much anything that's not indestructible. Speaking of indestructible things, we do have some ways to get rid of those, starting with Lost to Legend. It's a double white instant that says put target non-land historic permanent into its owner's library 4th from the top. So if your opponents have like an indestructible creature that you need to get rid of, or maybe they have their own copy of the One Ring or something like that, you can blast that thing to 4th from the top of the deck and just bury it alive, so that Lost to Legend just keeps it there. We also have Swords to Plowshares. Exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. Can't, unless they can give it hexproof, it's gone for the rest of the game. Same with Path to Exile. White, exile target creature, controller can search for a basic land card and put it on the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle. These are just your bread and butter ways of getting rid of things that are hard to kill. Next, we have the artifacts and enchantments that I wanted to include from the main set and the Precon. You got your basic mana tappers, Arcane Signet, and Mind Stone. We also have Well of Lost Dreams. 4 colorless. You get an artifact that says whenever you gain life, you pay X, where X is the less than or equal to the amount of life you've gained, and draw that many cards. So it's a way to draw cards off all this life gain in the deck. We also have of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, 2 and a white Saga, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature, create a food. Draw a card on Chapter 2, create a food. And Chapter 3, create a 1/1 halfling creature token for each food you control. That's the big one. If it gets to Chapter 3 and you have a bunch of food laying around, you're going to have a wide board to go smashing on through. We also have Assemble the Entmoot. For 3 and a green, you get an enchantment with creatures you control have reach. And sacrifice Assemble the Entmoot, create 3 XX green treefolk creature tokens, where X is the amount of life you've gained this turn. Put a reach counter on each one of them. So the cool thing here with Assemble the Entmoot is, like, if you just burst a bunch of tokens off or whatever, some kind of life gain triggers or whatnot, you can create some just gigantic treefolk with this thing in no time. And then since we got all this life gain in the deck and we're trying to keep up ahead of our opponents, we have a copy of the One Ring in here. Yes, I know it's expensive. It wasn't expensive when I started planning this out, and it got expensive really quick. 4 colorless, legendary artifact, indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until the next turn. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life for each burden counter on it, and you can tap and put a burden counter on it and draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. This is just one of the best ways to draw cards, and it is now available to any color because it's a colorless card, and I like this card here. And last but certainly not least, it's the land base. Most of it comes from the Precon. We have Brushland, Command Tower, Fortified Village, Scattered Groves, Canopy Vista. Those things all come in the deck. We also have Path of Ancestry from the deck, and then I added Overgrown Farmland from the Innistrad sets because I thought, okay, farmland farms, it goes well with the Hobbits, so I thought it fit here and give us another dual land option. And then, your usual plains and forests that go in the deck. So what do you guys think? I had a lot of fun kind of coming up with a way to make this work. It had give us some Oathbreaker mileage out of the Precon, and I think it works out pretty well, and it plays pretty nice in the little bit of playtesting I've done with it. So I want to hear what you think in the comments below. Do you think I made a good choice just going green-white, or would black-white do better, do you think? I'm kind of interested to see what you think. And as always, thank you for watching, and have a great day. All right, it's time to announce the winner of my 250 sub giveaway. I decided to go ahead and tag it onto the back of this video because I didn't want to sit on the information any longer. To help me pick the winner today, my daughter Liliana is here. She's going to introduce herself.
Hello.
And using a random comment picker, we went ahead and looked for that 250 passphrase that I put in the video that was going to pick the winner for this. And the winner of the contest is
DMCDCW.
In case you didn't know, that is username DMCDCW. You have won my 250 sub giveaway. In order to get your prize, please email me. My email will be down in the comments below. Or if you want, use a Twitter feed handle, and I will go ahead and contact with you in direct messages so we can get you your cards. Thank you, everyone, for entering. Thank you, everyone, for subscribing. And the next giveaway will be at 500 subscribers, which is about 98 subscribers away. So until then, we will see you in the next video.